Hello, everybody, and welcome to another interview. I'm Claire with Celestial Living, and I'm here with Tami Friday from Tami Friday LLC. And she's got some really great stuff to share today, and I'm really excited to get started. So, hi, Tami.
Hello, glad to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So my name is Tami Friday, and I'm an occupational therapist and Reiki master teacher. And I guess my motto is healing for your inner and outer self, or inner and outer space, I should say. So I do healing exercises like Reiki, CranioSacral Therapy, something called Energy Blast healing, just for healing for people in their space, also for animals as well. Love working with animals. They're so much fun. And I also work on people's environments. I think one thing I've come to realize is we're not always focusing on the space around us. We may do all this stuff for ourselves, and then our environment it's almost like a third of our energy is impacted by the environment around us. And so I do property clearings and readings, whether it's a home or a business. And I really love doing that as well. So
Cool. So, tell me a little bit about some of the gifts that you have. Like, which ones do you feel are your strongest, and how did you develop them?
I always feel like a jack of all trades, master of none. But probably my strongest gift has been clear cognizance, which is a sense of knowing. Sometimes I just get information that just resonates, and when I share that and go with it, it's usually pretty spot on or gets us in the right direction. And that's probably, like I said, the strongest one. It didn't always come for me. When I think back to when these gifts started to come, I had nothing. Like I probably up until 2014 or so, no gifts that I knew of. And I was very like left brain, logical. If it couldn't be proven that scientifically, it didn't exist. And that's kind of the background I came from. And I started to find that way of thinking didn't end up helping me, and I had to open my horizons to other things and kind of open up my intuition, because the left brain couldn't answer everything. And that's when I probably when I took Reiki as a for a session, not even when I learned and got attuned to Reiki, but even when I would go for Reiki, that's when things really started to open up for me over time. And it's pretty much been a fun and challenging journey ever since then.
Oh, yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Um, so would you say that you developed these gifts later on in life, and it was because of the Reiki. So when you first started experiencing them, would you like to speak a little bit about kind of what that was like when you first started like waking up to these new abilities and ways of thinking?
Yeah, I first started to just perceive things during Reiki sessions. And I owe a lot to my Reiki master who taught me, Lisa Moore. She, I would say, "Oh, I feel really tingly before I come into your like the very second session." I was like, "I feel really tingly as I'm driving into our appointment." And she kind of helped me understand a little bit of what was happening. And she had taught some psychic development courses, and that's where we got to play with different things and play with like oracle cards, play with seeing auras, just a whole bunch of stuff. And so in that play, I guess you could say, an exploration, that's where I started to realize things. And to be honest, I think with any intuitive gifts, or for anybody listening, I think at least for me, the biggest factor has been to trust them. I think a lot of times, I think the number one thing I hear the most, and even I tell myself still to this day, sometimes I'm like, am I just making this up? Is this really happening? Am I crazy? And I sort of made a commitment at some point to just pretend it's real and see what happens. Treat that intuition as if it really is true and go that way. And that's when a lot of magical things happen. And, you know, I guess when you ask people, I ask this to people, nobody's ever told me this yet, but I say, if when you listen to your intuition, has it ever steered you wrong? nobody's ever told me, yeah, that one time I listened to my intuition, oh, it just made a mess of things. Nobody's ever told me that. I'm still waiting for, maybe somebody out there has had that happen. I don't know, but I'm waiting to hear that. And that was the case for me. It's learning to trust that intuition, and that allows you to play and explore the gifts more, because you're opening yourself up and just going with it more. That's what helped me develop it for sure. Yeah.
I love that. I was actually reading a book about intuition, and one of the things that she recommended, I don't remember, I think it might have been Sonia Choquette, but I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
she said the biggest ways to just start developing is just be playful about it and just have fun with it. And so I love that you say that, because it's been my experience as well.
Yeah, it's so much fun to play. I don't know why, but just reminding me when I was a child, I watched some show about somebody who could like move objects. And I remember as a child, I would go in my bedroom and try to like pretend or try to move objects from one room, one part to the other. I couldn't do it, but I just had fun. I guess that stuff has always interested me, that I'm like, oh, that would be really handy to bring my stuffed animal from one side of the room all the way to my bed and not have to get up and move it. But I didn't have that. So but yeah, that sense of play with it. And technically speaking, the play energy, that fun energy, it's a relaxed vibration, it's a higher vibration, and it allows things to come in. We're in alignment more when we're having fun and playing too, than when we're all stressed out and things like that. And for me, and even to this day, growing up and in my education and schooling, so much of my brain was developed on study, analysis, rationality. I learned, my background's in like science and psychology and all those things. And I feel like that part of my brain was just overdeveloped in how I saw the world. And so it's easy for me to do the overthinking mode and critique and rationalize and put analysis to something. And that's a little bit tricky in this realm. And so, that's where I can really identify with clients where, often like, what's going on and this doesn't make sense. And it's like, doesn't have to make sense. That's okay. Letting that go, just letting it be for what it is and not have to be explainable. It makes it actually more fun, was what I'm realizing, because the possibilities are just who knows what. So
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. So would you say that kind of like what you're here to do and what you're here to offer the world at this
that's a
point?
good question. When I think about that, I guess I don't feel it in any grand way. I just feel my role on the planet is if I can like enhance anybody on it, any being on it, anything with the planet, whether it's a larger interaction, like a client session or something, or if it's just as small as I'm going to step around that ant instead of stepping on the ant as I'm walking on the sidewalk. Or there's times where, it sounds crazy, but I'm like tired and I don't want to rinse out my recyclables, but I always think, this is our planet, so I take that time and I make sure I put the recyclables in where they go so they can be picked up. So that's always my goal. Now, I don't always achieve it. Sometimes I can be crabby and whatever, but my ultimate goal is on if the more interactions I can make, the footprint I leave a little bit better for any being, then I call it a good day. So
Oh, I love that. Have you always kind of had that way of life? Because I know you said you were an occupational therapist before, so is that kind of what drove you into that field even?
yeah, I've always liked to be helpful to people. And um you know i, I guess I almost feel like um I've always wanted to support like the underdog in that way too. And with occupational therapy, you're usually working with people with disabilities. And, a lot of times people with disabilities in our society, they're marginalized. A lot of times they're not even seen as real people. To this day, when I see somebody in a wheelchair, or anything, I make sure I make contact with them. Like, hey, I see you. We're both people here. Because, when I worked more in that traditional setting, sometimes they were ignored, or, people would talk to their caregiver as if they weren't even there. And So I'm always drawn to kind of be there for the, person or being that isn't, like in the planet, right? Like I feel like helping the planet too, because that's like the underdog right now. Like we're just gonna do whatever to the planet, we'll be fine. And then, we're getting to a point where wow, we're making it's kind of a mess out there. Look at all the landfills and things like that. And as I tune into other beings, as I started doing property clearings more, I started to tap into nature spirits and elementals and things like that. And I kind of realized, like, hey, they have feelings and things that they want. And I think because we're not aware of their presence, we just do something not realizing it's going to impact them. Like even cutting grass, we just, oh, I'm going to chop that tree. Or that's actually how I became aware of it, to be honest. I was doing a property clearing, and I was actually out doing it on my own house, and I usually do it like once a month just to keep things fresh. And I was like lazy, and I missed a month. So, it was 2 months, and I did it, and I'm like, oh my, I picked up on this like almost like angry elemental energy. And as I tuned in, I'm like, what's going on? And I realized that the neighbor next door, they had taken down two big, large trees. Actually made me sad because one of the trees had I used to watch from my window squirrels playing in it, and there were birds. It was just like so much wildlife was in this one tree that I could see every morning. And that tree got taken down. They even found a woodpecker nest that the people who took the tree down, they ended up bringing it to a wildlife organization, and they were mad, like it just took this tree. And I realized that what we do impacts so many things. We don't always think about that. And I actually just explained, I'm like, because I talked to the neighbors, and the neighbors were explaining they had done it because the trees were diseased. They could fall on the house at any point. And so I kind of said that was the reason, was just to protect, the home. And now it's a different life cycle, because now when you have a dead tree or a stump, you have other life that forms. You have like the worms and the bugs, and that's like a whole new life cycle. And so I felt a sense of peace and just acknowledgement, just to be aware, and that acknowledgement of, hey, yeah, you're pissed, and I understand that. At least that's how I perceived it. So ever since, like even tuning in that one time, I'm very aware of nature spirits and elementals, and how what we do can impact them, and how to, make it more harmonious for all of us, even if we can't see or experience those other realms. They're there. So
Wow, that's really, really cool. It got me thinking about how everything is connected, and like everything inside us is a reflection of what's outside of us, because a lot of what I do in my hypnotic work is called parts work. And that's like all the little parts of ourselves. And more often than not, all they want is to be acknowledged and recognized. And then the problem goes away. And the way that you said how that happened with the spirits, like that's so cool to me, how sometimes they just need to be acknowledged and shown a little bit of love. And that's really amazing.
absolutely. I found that too during like craniosacral therapy Reiki sessions, is just when people tune into their body areas that are causing pain. Not for everybody. Sometimes there's those deeper layers, which I'm sure you can really get into with the hypnosis for sure. Because sometimes in sessions that we will sometimes tap into that we call it inner physician, in that we use that language. It's like learning to dialogue with a body part or something like that to see what is going on. And I was in a session recently where the person had like increase in swelling and edema in their legs, and they're like, oh, what's going on? And I use the body as an indicator, because this doesn't always come up in sessions. Like if the body doesn't really indicate it's ready for a conversation like that, but if it is, we'll bring it up. And I just like, do you want to let's talk to edema. Let's see what edema has to say. And when people are able to open up with that, it was so cool, because, and you probably have so many stories. Sometime we'll have to talk. I want to hear more of your work and your sessions. But this client said, they were speaking like, oh, I see a pyramid, and I was like, okay, we're trying to figure it out. And what ended up, as we kind of decoded what was happening, that client said, if these certain areas on my legs are touched, it's going to help. Because I said, what can we do to help my client's edema? And that's what came out. And so I'm like, so much, they were on her legs, and with CranioSacral Therapy and Reiki, I do light touch. And so I'm like, well, here, and they're on her calves basically. And I'm like, here. And she's like, yes. So I just held there for a while until we felt like that was it. And I kind of thought, I'm like, these are acupressure points. I'm going to look these up later. And when I blew me away when I looked them up. Sure enough, they are acupressure points. There's like a certain number of them that can help with edema. And these were 4 of the like 15 of them. Yeah. I was
Wow.
like, wow. I haven't seen the client yet to hear, because I told him, like, I can't wait to hear like if that did anything. But tapping into our higher selves, or that inner physician, or as you probably know with hypnosis, I mean, there's a knowing there, that, and if we can tap into that to help understand what's really going on, that's just, I love that stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about the craniosacral therapy and what that is and how you do it?
Sure. It's like it's tricky, because I can be super technical with it. It's an osteopathic modality, blah, blah, blah. It's basically a light touch modality where we're influencing tissue in the body, in essence, or in part, to enhance the cerebral spinal fluid flow. And so, the cerebral spinal fluid is what bathes the brain and the spinal cord. It gives nourishment, oxygen, food, takes away waste products, things like that. So when we as a practitioner detect any restrictions, we know that that's not really flowing very well. And so we do techniques to allow that fluid flow to move easier. And so that can result in symptoms like reduced pain, and just more optimal body system, the way it works. And so there's a component of craniosacral therapy. And I should mention, it's a very light touch. It's like the weight of a nickel, 5 grams. And so we work, a lot of people are used to like chiropractic and other modalities where the pressure is deep. And this is just the opposite. It works by, the concept of that, where we're like, we have a lot of water in us and we can just bypass our body's defense mechanisms. The analogy I give is, imagine if your body's like a warm stick of butter on a summer day and you plop a nickel on top of it. Eventually that nickel's just gonna sink into the tissue and create some nice release. And a component of craniosacral therapy is what's called somato-emotional release. And so that's the component that doesn't happen every session. It just happens when it naturally can, when the body gives a physical indicator. And then that's like what happened with this client, where we dialogue and tune into, what's components of the body. And sometimes I've had sessions with clients where maybe working through a past traumatic event, and kind of one client was, had like gallbladder pain and pain in the area. And so when we tuned into the gallbladder that was actually removed, I've learned that even when you have an organ removed, energetically, it's still there. The energy is still there. We dialogued with the surgeon who removed it, and there was some, healing that had to be done around the way the client felt that they were being treated during and after surgery and things like that. And they felt some closure with that. And so that helped with their symptoms and just their feeling about some of the medical care that they had. So that's super, like, I love that stuff. It's just amazing. Any sort of healing like that is really cool. So you probably get a lot of that, I imagine, with hypnosis for sure.
I was wondering, the spinal fluid, does that have anything to do with like Kundalini energy? Are you familiar with that?
I'm a little bit. I actually want to learn more about the Kundalini. I'm going to look into that, because I imagine so. I mean, a lot of the points that we do tissue release are along the chakras. I don't think that's an accident. And it's funny, because literally the last client that I saw was telling me that she felt like energy moving up her spine during the session, while we were doing different cranial and Reiki things. So I'm gonna look into that. That I think the little bit I know about Kundalini, is it moves energy. Like I know there's the Kundalini yoga, I think, right, with breath work and things, and it moves energy. So I imagine it's moving energy in some way too.
Yeah,
I
Dr.
think
Joe Dispenza talks about how if you activate it the right way, it sends like a shot of spinal fluid like all the way up into your brainstem and causes like an instant awakening of sorts.
oh
And
wow.
things like that. So it has to do with the spinal fluid for sure, which is neat. And I love that you work with that. That's really cool. I hadn't heard of
Thank you.
that.
That is really cool. I'm going to look that up too, because I mean, there's got to be. I'm sure there's a relationship there. It sounds like there would be. I haven't really explored that though. So, thank you for that. That's the neat thing about like a lot of this spiritual journey that we're all doing is that if our goal is to climb the mountain, there's so many paths up the mountain. There's no right path, is what I've learned, and I try to work on that. Like sometimes I'm like I'm so excited about the path that I'm going. I'm like, oh, try this, but at the end of the day, it's just one path and there's so many ways. Thank goodness there are, because one path is what resonates for one person, another person this path is more fun. So
I love that. It's so true too. Wow. This has been an awesome conversation already.
I know I could talk for hours. Very fun.
So I was wondering if you'd be willing to share about like a dark night of the soul that you've experienced and how you came out on the other side knowing that all those things that maybe seemed bad at the time were actually for your higher good.
Absolutely. I had a dark night of the soul. One of them, I say there's lots of them in the lifetime, but one was where I had really severe migraine headaches. I think that I've had them, throughout my life, but they were like twice a year, no big deal. But probably in 2012, I believe, they started to get really frequent and really long lasting, very debilitating. I spent many a day in the dark of a room, just in pain. I started to develop fatigue as well, where it was just too much energy for me to get out of bed to go to the bathroom. I'd have to muster up energy literally to walk around the corner and use the bathroom. And so, when you're in a state like that, work is very hard. And at the time I worked in a hospital and, was on multiple medical leaves. I was barely clinging to my job. And I, like, how do I heal? And Western medicine wasn't really helpful for me. It didn't, in some ways it made me, physically sicker. So I'm like, okay, that route isn't working for me. So what else? And so I, read up on triggers for migraines, cleaned up, the chemicals that I cleaned with, the chemicals in my food. I threw out, all this processed food that I used to eat, and started that way. And that made me feel physically better, but didn't really, make too much of a dent in my headaches. And so then I thought, maybe this is a spiritual or psychological problem, so let's explore that. And then I feel like when we're ready for something, stuff comes in, or maybe it's always coming. Maybe if we just shut the door on it, that's probably more likely what happens. So when I finally was like, maybe it's this, now I was open to looking at other things. Shortly after that, I, became aware of a Reiki practitioner who ended up teaching me Reiki after that. And that Reiki has been life-changing for me in just teaching me a world of healing beyond just, the physical, like what we can prove in a study, basically from my, that I learned in my schooling. And I guess for me, that journey helped me to be more authentic with myself and to learn to be more in tune with myself. I realized that I was a person that just went through the motions and just did what everybody expected me to do. I didn't even realize how I felt about things. When I think, so I was actually another person when I think back. And one example I remember is when I had a Reiki session, I was stuffed up and I was asked, do you want a Kleenex? And I was like, yeah, no. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, you're confusing. What do you mean yes or no? And And I thought about it. So this person that kind of challenged me, made me really think about what I was saying. And I was like, oh, and I was like, well, I guess I do want a Kleenex. I do want to blow my nose, but I'm afraid to impose. And then I thought, wow, really? I don't want to impose about like, oh boy, so much effort to go and, 3 feet away and get a Kleenex for me. So that was like probably the first start of me realizing, wow, I'm really not in tune with what I'm saying and who I am even, and what, or even just my importance. And so, that journey just started to me becoming more aware of all of that. And I think the fatigue piece of it, well, people talk about like, what are the metaphysical and like the spiritual world. I think a lot of people talk about what are metaphysical reasons for different things. And I guess my personal belief is in that is, if it's a tool that's helpful, use it. Just make sure that you're not putting blame on yourself, like, oh, I did something wrong, um, but one of the components of a migraine, they say, can be like, if anybody's a fan of Louise Hay, she she's got like a book, Heal Your Body, that talks about these patterns of body parts and what could be a reason for those ailments. And for me, it was not being authentic. And I was learning that I was saying yes to things I really wanted to say no to. And the migraines conveniently made me too sick to, like with commitments. Let's say somebody said, hey, do you want to do this? Okay. Not even knowing if I wanted to or not. And then later I'm like, oh, I don't really want to do that. And, the migraine would be preventing me from doing it. And I started to realize that, I think we lost her. I don't know if this is still recording or not.
It is. Sorry about that.
Okay. I started to realize that, I rather say no to things on my own and then enjoy my time than to be miserable in pain in the dark, suffering. So that helped me to be tuning into, what do I want? And can I say no when I mean no, say yes when I mean yes? So that was a journey on that end. The fatigue, my energy level was so low that I had to really be discerning in where I spent my energy. And so that kind of taught me what's important. I can't give, to be honest, I couldn't give like I was before. I had to, be more choosy about where I put my energy. And so that taught me, okay, what I want to do with my energy. I can't just give it away, by doing this thing that doesn't really fit me, or that doesn't fit me. So all these things in essence really taught me to be more authentic with who I am and the way, the path that I'm meant to be on, I guess. So I'm thankful for that, because I feel like with people, if this resonates for anybody going on this, I guess, spiritual awakening is like, for me, I feel more alive now. Before I felt like really I was like going through the motions, and it's almost like, yeah, you live, you don't know better. You're like, this is fine, and then later you're like, well, this is even better. Like, I'm glad, to be this way. It's almost like the trees are greener, the sky is bluer, that kind of thing. It's not like I was unhappy before. I just had more unhappy pieces in my life. And now I'm working on whittling more of that unhappiness away and just keeping focused on more joyful things to the best way I can. So yeah, definitely helped out. It's easier to say I'm thankful for it after the worst of it. You can't say that when you're laying in bed in pain or whatever, miserable. Then you just want it over. And I'm just drawn to share for anybody who is going through that, where you're so miserable and you're just almost like you're crying, and you are really in that dark night of the soul, where you're just like, this sucks. I always think, just pray, just ask for help, and whatever you believe in, whatever your system is, just ask for help and say, I'm too sick, or I'm too this, I can't, I need help. And I can speak for myself that every time I ask for help in some form or some way, I get that help, whether it's somebody helping me out or something opens up, and it gets me out of that deep pit that I maybe landed in. So
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just want to stress on the ask for help thing, because we have free will. And so there's so many beings out there that would love to help us, but they can't interfere with our free will unless we ask them to. And that's why it's so important to ask, and just ask. And I mean, I've experienced that too, where as soon as you ask, like all of a sudden by some like random little miracle, like you get what you ask for. And it's amazing. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Absolutely. I think the asking tells the universe or the world or whatever that you're ready. I don't think to be honest, I don't think we're ready if we're not asking. We're not quite ready.
That's
And,
true.
you know, to ask is a point of surrender, to say, hey, I can't do this alone and I need something. And then we're more likely to receive it. So absolutely, like what you're saying with free will. And I think it's, acknowledging that, okay, I'm ready to receive the help and utilize the help. Because I kind of suspect that help is being thrown to us a lot. We're getting a lot of life preservers all the time, but I don't think we're seeing them sometimes, at least for me. So I'm probably not seeing them until I'm ready. And then I'm like, okay, I need a life preserver. Oh, there it is. I'm not saying it's instantaneous always, but having that trust and faith really has been helpful for me.
I love that. Thank you. I was wondering now about your spirit guides, and if you do have like a regular communication with them, and kind of just like if you'd like to tell a story about maybe the first time that you met them, or how you typically go about communicating with them.
Sure. I guess I found in my life with spirit guides, they, have several that I'm aware of. They kind of, for me, seem to come more to the forefront during certain stages of my life as I need them. One example is when I worked home care. I was, home care OT, and I drove around in some sketchy neighborhoods and that were unsafe, and it was a little scary as a woman, and it's not like I could bring a gun to my session or something. I wouldn't do that, just not me. And so there were times where I just, especially if you're sensitive to energy, you just feel like the hairs in your neck. Oh, this area gives me the creepos, this particular block or this street. So the spirit guide that came to my awareness was this large Native American man, spirit guide. And how I met the spirit guide is earlier on, a lot of times practitioners that I would go to would share things, and then I would tune into them later. So this particular guide, during a Reiki session, a practitioner said they saw this Native American influence. And so I went home and meditated and introduced myself and just tuned into what I saw or felt. And I asked for a name, and this cracks me up with this. I got the name I got Tippy Toes. And I'm like, what? Because I felt this presence of this big, tall, strong Native American energy. Tippy Toes? Like, what? Like, okay, I must be imagining, like, okay, Tami, focus, and like I kept, no, Tippy Toes. I'm like, what the heck is that? Side note, as I was tuning in, I was seeing images of like, I believe that like I shared a past life with this Native American, because like we were married and had a child together. And as I'm tuning in, this large man, he was very clumsy, actually. He would like trip over things. And so the Tippy Toes was sort of like a nickname to make fun. Because his real name was like Tippecanoe, actually, as I tuned in more. So and he actually has a sense of humor that, as I kind of would tune into his energy over those couple year periods, he just would make me laugh. And that was the start of it, like Tippy Toes. So, that was kind of fun. But I don't feel his presence as much anymore because I'm not doing home care in unsafe neighborhoods. And so, there's not as much of a need. And now I communicate more with other beings and things like that. So, but yeah, it's kind of fun to explore that for sure.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody who maybe wants to start building relationships more with guides or other helpful beings?
I would recommend getting into some guided meditation or even probably the hypnosis, something that helps you, whatever modality that is, to help you tune in and quiet your mind and start to explore. Usually I found for me in a guided way initially. I've done a lot of guided meditations and things. Now I'm at a point where I a lot of times can guide myself. And so when I want to meet something or want to connect, I just quiet myself and just talk in my head, like, I want to meet you, what's your name? And I just wait for the responses that I get. But if you're new to it, probably a guided meditation would be something that is an easier way to go about it. And if it's hard, to do it like with a YouTube video or something, maybe, probably go with a practitioner where they can kind of help you really relax through either the hypnosis or Reiki session or energy healing session. That's I would say a good way to give it a try. So
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. So I was wondering then, what does your daily spiritual practice look like, and how has it developed over the years and as you have developed?
My main thing is just to I try to do this in the morning when I wake up and before I go to bed, is just what I'm grateful for. What happened during the past day or what's to come that I'm just thankful for. And the more I focus on, it could be something like, I'm glad my car is reliable, or I'm thankful for my clients, or I'm thankful that my arms and legs work. And I try to do that even when I'm not feeling well. So I'm still dealing with like fatigue and things, not as bad as it was, but even if I have pain or fatigue, I always think, what, I can still move my hands, I can still get from point A to B for the most part, and I'm thankful for that. That is a huge piece for me, just to help turn around anything for me. And the other point is also I use affirmations. And so as I go about my life, I tune into any beliefs that might not be helpful for me, that maybe I was taught as a child, or things like, example might be, I'm not worthy of love, as an example. So I have affirmation statements that say I'm worthy of love. And I have a list of some common ones that I'm maybe working on at any given time. And I have them right where I can see them every morning. And I say them. And for me, that's my way of kind of reprogramming any subconscious beliefs. As I work with things in my own exploration and work with clients, I've just learned that a lot of times we have these beliefs that they don't serve us anymore. And sometimes if we really dig in, we can figure out where it came from. Maybe it was a specific incident in childhood where somebody said something, or a message. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was a child, my mom took me and my neighbor to, I'm just sorry, my mom, I just felt my mom like, oh, you're telling that story again, like, because it makes her look not so good, but sorry, Mom, it's a good story. So funny. Sorry. My mom passed on, and I feel her sometimes. Yes, I'm sharing that story. Hope that's okay. I'm getting like a, yeah. Anyway, so my mom took me and my neighbor, I don't remember how old we were, like little kids, let's just say little kids. And it was some Mickey Mouse thing, and we both loved Mickey Mouse, and we both got these balloons. I think Disney still does them. The inner layer of the helium balloon is like a Mickey Mouse shape, and then there's an outer balloon that's kind of transparent. So you have like a 2-layer balloon. It was really cool, especially as a kid. And after we left the show that she took us to, and we got these balloons, we're just, me and my neighbor are just so excited. And then his balloon deflated, so he lost the outer layer. And yeah, exactly, your face like, so my mom was like, Tammy, Tammy, give him your balloon so he's not so sad, because he was crying. And so she made me give him my balloon, and then I was crying. And so when I had tuned into that particular situation, what I mistakenly got out of it was, other people's feelings are more important than my own. And so that was a message that I got from that particular scenario, and maybe others like it, that I had to kind of rework and undo as an adult. And I know that my mom meant to, I know she was teaching me to be considerate of other people, to not be selfish, to think of other people's feelings. And I know her intention was wonderful, but the way I interpreted it was distorted, to be honest. And so that's something to for me that I had to work on healing, is that would be an affirmation that I would have, as my needs are just as important as others. And so those spiritual practices are things that I find very valuable, and they're real easy, they're free, they're cheap, and really effective. So yeah.
Wow, that's a powerful story that I'm sure so many people can relate to. Because, you know, a lot of these things that we have limiting beliefs about in our life, it's not because like our parents were like bad people all the time. Sometimes it's just those little things that we misinterpret. And that's why we have to like go back in and fix the way that we saw that thing, rather than trying to like fix like our parents or that outer person that maybe caused it unintentionally. And that's really powerful. And I really thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things with our experiences is we're trying to make sense of a situation, and maybe that's just the way I interpreted it. And so sometimes I find, and I found this for myself, and I always challenge clients to really look at their lives, is the way you were doing something, does it serve you? Is it helpful? Is there a different way of looking at it that's just more helpful for you? You know, for me, that's not really a helpful belief, to think I need to, the other people's needs are more important than my own. And when you have that belief, just imagine your behavior. What is your behavior? You neglect your own needs, you do everything for everybody else, which is exactly what I did. And so that's where migraines and, right, like I don't want my practitioner to give me a Kleenex, because it was so, I just laugh sarcastically now, like it was so much burden for her to do that for me, but that's how I felt, and so kind of to go with that is, I think with changes was when you start to change and start to realize, oh, this is not who I want to be, because it doesn't feel good. That's like my barometer. Does it feel good or does it not? It doesn't feel good to feel like your needs aren't important, as an example. It feels better to feel like I'm just as worthy as anybody else, ideally. And so, working towards that. But once you start to change, a lot of other things can change. And, as I look back to that shift, I had lost a lot of friends, and I at the time I was like, what happened? And I realized, well, I was a different person. I was friends with people who could take, and like, great, thank you, awesome. And then all of a sudden, well, how come you're not so helpful anymore? And so then, your relationships start to change, and the people that don't really fit the new you start to fade away, and then new people come into your life that sort of fit who you are as you go. And so, that's kind of a different component of it.
Have you noticed as a practitioner that fairly often you get a client that just happens to like be going through something that you're also going through, because you're always attracting like that same energy, and it's so neat to kind of like have those things come up.
Absolutely. My person who taught me Reiki, Lisa, was the first person that kind of pointed that out, that all people are mirrors to us, and kind of show it to us, kind of the good stuff and the bad stuff. And that's where I work on, okay, does something upset me? Why is that? Because I feel like if something's a trigger for me, it's because there's something that hasn't healed in that area. Because when I think of things that used to bother me that don't, oh, well, I've actually healed from some of that. So that's where I'm always looking at what rubs me the wrong way and why. And I used to be more like, it's them. Now I'm like, no, it's me. Because I've noticed that people, for example, there was a person in my life where they rubbed me the wrong way, and then I changed, and they hadn't changed, but I changed towards them. And so that kind of taught me, wait, it's actually me and how I perceive the world. And you're right, it's like that law of attraction. And so when I see clients with certain things, you see the pattern, and I laugh because I think the number one client, I still from time to time is like people who like to think a lot. That's my comfort zone. I'm good at thinking. And so I laugh and I'm like, okay, I got somebody else that's thinking a lot. I must be thinking a lot. So let's look at that. So I feel blessed to benefit from my sessions with clients. It's like one of my intentions that I set when I work with clients is that we have a wonderful co-creation. One of my intentions used to be that I serve them, my needs aren't important because I never want to take away from a client's session. But then I realized, well, I'm important too. We're interacting here. And yes, the session is really about them. But, if I can have some takeaways from it and that make me a better person, better practitioner, of course, I'm going to utilize that. And so, yeah, absolutely. I learn a lot from that. And I'm blessed to even notice those patterns now. So yeah, I always tell people, yeah, if you see the same thing happening in your life, it's almost like I feel like the universe is just giving you opportunities to work through things. And because you hear from a lot of people, oh, I always have the same kind of boyfriend, this boyfriend is just like the other one. And anytime you hear that phrase, it's an indicator, oh, there's something that I haven't healed from, work through, especially if it's something you don't like. If it's something you like, well, great, enjoy it. But if it's like something not so great for you, it's like, what is going on, And what I've learned personally is when you're aware of that, the universe will still bring you stuff like that. And even when you feel like you've healed from it, you'll still probably get a little bit more of it added to your life. I almost feel like the universe is saying, are you sure you've changed?
Yes.
Are you sure? And because sometimes if you're not fully moving through something, you may slip back into those old patterns and old ways of being. And that's happened to me where, I go right back. And then it's like, okay, just learn again. And then if I get to a certain point where, yes, I learned that lesson, then when that presents itself, it's like, no, I truly am not interested anymore. And then it doesn't really show up anymore. If it does, I just don't even, it's like nothing, So it's kind of neat how that is. And I just see it as just a benevolence. That's just my perspective of the universe, is always just trying to, hey, here's something to work on. You want to work on it? There's not like to me, there's not any like super good or super bad. It's just stuff to help us learn and grow. And, if we can, treat ourselves and treat other people with grace, that's a good thing. So
I love that so much. I've loved this whole
I know, like it's neat.
So I know for a lot of people, it's kind of like the dream to have a spiritual business and to be able to help people full time. And so I was wondering, in your opinion, what is the most important personality trait or strength that someone who wanted to be successful running a spiritual business or service of some kind, what do you think that would be?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think more and more people are realizing. The one thing I've noticed is when I just before COVID hit, when I left traditional OT, and I'm like, this is not my calling. I'm going to do what gives me joy, and I'm going to figure out a way to do it. All of a sudden, I didn't have the anxiety and the dread that I used to have. I didn't have the stressful productivity. I got to meet productivity, and I got to work these long hours. And like with home care, it's like you're never shut off. And I finally left that. And then I was seeing my colleagues, like when they post on Facebook, for example, they're like, oh my God, they said the same stuff. And they were going through all that. Like, oh, I'm only living for the weekend here. What's happening? And then something happened with COVID where I don't know what it was. It's like a lot of people in masses were starting to come to things where when I had the headaches, was, what do I really want to be doing? Do I really want to be doing this? And now things are just shifting and changing. There's having trouble hiring people because maybe people are realizing I don't really want to do that. And people are finding themselves now. And so I think there's more and more people that are going into spiritual businesses right now, for sure. And I guess my advice, probably the biggest piece would be, do something you love, for sure. make sure you love it, because if you're going to run a business by it, you're going to be doing it a lot, and you're going to be thinking about it and living and breathing it a little bit. And so make sure you love it, because otherwise it's going to suck. Pardon my language. That's probably my biggest advice, is make sure you really like what you're doing, or love what you're doing, for sure. I guess maybe secondarily to that is to just keep at it. There are ups and downs with a small sole proprietor, single business. It's like, for me, as an adjustment to having a set paycheck that I could just count on as long as I put my hours in. And with, when you're self-employed, your income really, it has to do more with energy. And I feel like that your energetic, what you're allowing, than it does with how many hours you put in. And so it's just being trusting, what you're doing, and having resources to support you when things are a little bit slimmer, and then enjoying things when they're a little bit fuller. And so whatever the word would be for keep at it, keep at it-ism, that would be helpful. If people throw in the towel really quickly, a lot of businesses, don't succeed after the first year. I think there's some statistics with that, and that's okay. If it's not somebody's cup of tea, not everybody's meant to do that. But if you really want to, it's, getting resources of support, and just, taking it one step at a time. My philosophy has kind of been, I saw this quote once, and that's kind of how I live my life. Sometimes I don't want to live it that way, but I'll explain it. It's, you can drive across the country in the dark with only seeing just the headlights in front of you. In other words, you don't need to see 5 miles down the road, 20 miles down the road. All you really need to do is see just in front of you. Is there a bump? Is there a thing in the road? And then you can really keep going that way. And that's almost how life plays out for me a lot, where I maybe know the next step, or the next 2 steps, or 3, but I don't know. I mean, life is played out. I have no idea what can happen a year from now. No idea. And it makes it exciting, for one, but it requires a lot of trust. To trust that where you're going is on a good path. And for a lot of people, myself included, that would have been really hard to live that way. I need to know what's happening, that sort of thing. So being okay with the way things play out, and just trusting that things are going to work out, and taking action when you're divinely guided to.
Wow.
So there you got a whole bunch.
I love that metaphor about the headlights. That's so true. Because if you're focused on what's happening 5 miles down the road, then how do you know what's right in front of you?
Yeah, you miss something, Wow. How many of us trip on a crack because you're looking way ahead, like, oh, I didn't even see that.
I love that. Wow. So my last question for you is, what is one question that you wish I would have asked, and how would you have answered it?
Honestly, I think all your questions were wonderful. I cannot really think of any question, to be honest. Yeah.
All right, cool.
That's a good question to catch all. So yeah, I feel like I shared whatever came up, and yeah.
This is amazing. So I lied. There is one more question. Where can people find you if they would be interested in booking a session or just chatting with you? How can people find you?
The easiest way is through my website, and that's TamiFriday.com. So that's spelled TamiFriday.com. And there is my phone number, email, website with the services and descriptions. And, I'm easy to reach. However, people see fit. So if you're somebody that feels like, yeah, maybe some healing for your inner space or healing for your outer space, and if you resonate, I'd love to work with you and see what fun stuff or not so fun, like healing isn't always fun. That's why I say that. But, I'd love to work with anybody who connects with me. So.
Great. And I will also post a link to your website in the description of this video so that anybody who's interested can find you that way as well. So thank you so much for being here today, Tami, and I'm looking forward to chatting more with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this, Claire, and for making this platform for people just to learn and grow. You and I were talking in the beginning that we wish we would have had this information and resources in the beginning. So anybody who's looking for resources and just learning what other people are going through, these interviews are so great, and I love listening. I still want to listen to some of the other interviews you've done, and so far they're wonderful. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
I'm so happy that you came.